You're listening to The Echoes with me, Emily Andrew, the self-development podcast that explores personal stories, powerful tools, and an insight into the wide world of mental, physical, and spiritual health. Get ready to get curious, be inspired, and connect in. For those of you who had listened to the podcast that I had before, you may recognize my next guest. We had already discussed the origins of sobriety together, as well as friendship and our common thread, which is acting and performance. But I'm really excited to bring her onto this podcast, and the conversation that we had is such an inspiring one for anyone who feels like their self-worth has really taken a bit of a beating, if they are exploring being curious about being sober, and just so much more. My guest is Elizabeth Morris, and she is a UK-based screenwriter and actor, and her latest screenplay is being directed by Idris Elba. With 4 years of alcohol sobriety under her belt now, she is keen to share her mental wellness journey with others. So I won't talk anymore. Let's just get into it. It's funny because it feels like we should be really old hats at this, but actually it's been a few years. There was one point where I figured that we'd just have some kind of podcast together because you were appearing on Tribe Talk so many times. And then this is all a very good thing. But for people that have a new listeners or people that aren't familiar with you, how would you describe yourself? Tell us who you are and a bit about what you do.
Okay, so why is that such a massive question? Where do I start? How do you answer
It's so hard,
this?
isn't it?
It's really hard. I'm Elizabeth Morris. I'm a screenwriter, and I have been working in the film industry for about 12 years now. And for the past 4 years, I have been on quite a journey regarding kind of mental health and reshaping my brain and how I apply that to my work and to my whole life. And I imagine that's pretty much what we're going to cover today, hence mentioning those two things. That's how I would describe myself, I suppose.
It's always a really difficult one, isn't it? And I think I'm gonna make it even more difficult by saying, who are you when you're not working?
When am I not working? That's the question. At the moment,
Yeah, what is that? You're self-employed. It's always
it's constant. Okay, when I'm not working, now that's a good question. I would definitely describe myself as a creative person. So when I'm not working, I'm generally spending my time doing something of a creative nature, whether it is painting. I love painting, actually. In my free time, I absolutely love to paint and draw. Singing, much to my neighbours' despair, I expect, top of my lungs. Spending time
I'm in
with
that camp.
absolutely. Spending time with my lovely boyfriend, my family. I'm a very, very dedicated auntie to two amazing, amazing children. My niece who's 5 and my nephew who's 1, and they are the absolute joy of my life. So yeah, I would say I'm very family orientated. I'm very much I enjoy these days being at home. I think I used to describe myself as probably as an extrovert, very much constantly with friends or in social environments, always out and about. And these days I really love being at home. So I am quite often just sort of cozied up at home. And I've been quite lucky to be able to travel this year as well. I do love to travel. So it's been a good year, actually. I had a very good year. Yeah.
Good year. It's good.
It's been a good
2023.
Year. Yeah, actually. I'm really happy to say that. Yeah.
I think it is really interesting as well when you reflect on that, of like, who actually am I? Because I think when you're younger, there's so much pressure on figuring that out. And actually, we're not pushing 90 or anything, we've
No.
still got a lot longer to go. But I think that there's almost an acceptance of like, oh, right, I'm gonna keep changing, I'm gonna keep evolving, I'm gonna keep going through different phases of my life and understanding about who I am behind coping mechanisms or identities, and things shifts and change. And I think that it's so nice when you feel a kind of peace with knowing that you don't fully know sometimes, and that
Yes.
things change.
And actually, when you asked the question, what do you do, or who are you? I realized that my answer to that question is so far beyond what it used to be. And I think that's where it feels a little bit jarring sometimes to be asked that, because if you'd asked me that same question, say 4 years ago, the answers would have been completely different. And actually, when you stop and think about, oh, who am I? What do I do? What do I like? What's really nice actually is that my head kind of goes, oh, there's so many things. There's so many things. I've got lots of answers to that question. Whereas at one point, I can remember, actually, we'll just go straight into it. Therapy. It was a therapy session, but probably about 3 years ago, and I was asked to write down on a piece of A4 paper, in the middle of it, I am, and then a load of branches off, to describe myself. And I honestly couldn't think of a single thing. I didn't know. I had nothing. I didn't know how to answer it, because I was so confused about who I was, to the point where I can remember doing an interview for something regarding a film project, and one of the questions was, it was things like, what's your favorite music, what's your favorite food, what's your favorite, all these questions. And I did not know. I had absolutely no answer to any of those questions, because I had absolutely no idea who I was. I didn't know what I actually liked. And I can remember having an absolute meltdown over these questions, because I just had to sort of make it up, lie. And I never felt that it was okay to say I don't know, or I like all the foods, all the genres, all the, having to kind of, I think there is a certain expectation on all of us to kind of pigeonhole ourselves into, for example, what films do you like? Well, to me, I find it so difficult to answer that question, because I don't have there's not a specific genre that I particularly like. It's kind of a bit of everything. Same with music, same with art, same with clothes, same with everything. There's so much sort of variety to it, and I feel much more, I allow myself to say I don't know, and that's who I am. I don't know what, it's kind of there's just such a variety and such a mix, and that's what it is. But I do remember that I actually remember that being a very distressing question at one point, and now it's not. It's sort of fun to play with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, instead of it being about I have to define my identity, it's like, well, who am I today? Like, what do I like today?
Yes.
Today,
What do I like today?
A bit of peace and quiet. Yeah.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I think maybe people respond to that in a bit of a way, because it becomes a bit more unpredictable, and they're like, oh, but we can't control you, because we can't control like, we don't know. And there's like an uncertainty around the freedom, and people can sometimes find that quite difficult.
Yes, because
but
they can't put you in a box that they recognize. Yeah, I know. People do like to be able to put people into boxes that they recognize. That makes them feel comfortable, I think. But yeah, like you said, who am I today? Today I'm quiet, and I'm comfortable, and I'm cozy, and I'm warm, and then other days it's like running around or go to the gym, or certain days I'll be eating super healthy food and really loving that. Other days it's let's get a pizza, and like there's not, I love the variety. I like honoring the variety that life offers, and just kind of like taking a bit of everything.
Yeah, it's like that flexibility, which is so refreshing as well.
Freeing.
Yeah. And I guess at that time, so when we last sat down and really had a big conversation recorded, you had not long stopped drinking. And so it sounds like that moment was after that, which I guess makes sense, because it's almost like one, because I think when you do stop drinking, there is a thing of like, oh shit, like
Who am I?
who am I?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do?
Yeah.
And like, is that kind of what had happened?
Yeah. Um, yeah, absolutely. I think at that point I think in very early sobriety, you're faced with so many questions about yourself. One massive question being, why was I drinking so much? Or why was alcohol a problem for me? And that is such a massive, uncomfortable question that it takes so much time to sort through that. That I do think at the beginning it can feel like you're free falling and you have no idea where you're going to land. But then after that, or during that time, kind of being able to gather tools and learn about yourself, and kind of yeah, I'd say with the tools, it's like you kind of are forced to find the things that help you through the moments that you thought alcohol was helping you through. So for example, you have an argument with somebody, or you have a really bad day. How do I manage this? Because previously it would be like, well, I'll have a glass of wine, and we all know that doesn't actually help, but you sort of think you kind of lured into the false belief that it does help, or maybe it does help momentarily, and then it gets, if alcohol is a problem for you, it can then become catastrophic, and it can make the problem so much worse. But those were sort of the immediate things that alcohol would be the immediate thing you'd reach for, because it's maybe all you knew. But when you don't have that, you are forced to find other ways of dealing with those really, really uncomfortable feelings that you never ever learn to manage, and actually probably never had enough time to fully sit with, to actually understand what those feelings were or where they were coming from. So yeah, I think in early sobriety, not knowing who you are is massive. I think it's a massive, massive thing, and it's really uncomfortable.
And I think that's why so many people totally change their life. Like, people will join a gym, join CrossFit, or come up with, like, they will, it's almost like finding where you belong again, all over
Yeah,
again. It's like,
yeah,
where do I fit now? If I
yeah,
don't have this, where do I fit? But I think
yeah,
you highlighted the real difference between stopping the behavior, which is drinking, and then finding other coping mechanisms. But you actually said, like, why was I doing it? And it's getting behind that means that the change isn't a superficial one, because if we're just
yeah,
focusing on the symptoms and the stopping, then we're
yeah.
going to end up transferring to a problematic relationship with exercise or food, or
Yes,
gambling, or
yes,
that we will find something else to bridge that gap that we have been
yes.
feeling.
You're completely right, because it's like replacing one addiction with the other, even if it is something that has got positive connotations, socially positive connotations, like exercise, which we all know can evolve into something problematic. Even, I would say, for me, I think actually a lot of my early sobriety ended up I'd say maybe 7 months in was lockdown.
Mm.
So I didn't have the option to go to anywhere, really. There was so much sitting with it that I think at that point was like, I need help. I really need a professional to help me through these feelings. I don't know how to do this. And I think had that not been the case, I may have actually just transferred that one thing. I may have just transferred it onto another and not fully dealt with actually the why. And it is figuring out why you were doing it, or why it was a problem. I think that can probably be delayed if you're just transferring one habit onto another. So for me, it was really, really uncomfortable. But then I decided to go into therapy to talk about it. And that's when huge changes started happening. And that's when I was asked to write I Am. And I had no idea. I was so lost and so empty and distressed. Like the level of distress that I was feeling was so uncomfortable, and I didn't know why. When you're feeling that thing where you've got that kind of funny feeling in your tummy. I know anxiety manifests itself and feels very different to everybody, but for me it would be sort of like it almost feels like a coldness in my stomach, like just above my belly button. I can almost feel it, and sometimes it would just be there lingering, and I would not know why. So then I would just cry, and I'd be so frustrated with the feeling, and I couldn't link it to a thought or a thing or an experience or anything until then going into therapy. And then it was, okay, let's start with baby steps, and then it went quite deep, and then it did get, it's an amazing process to go through, but it is a lot. Yeah, it's a real journey.
I think as well, sometimes when we have that feeling, we identify as that feeling as well. Like if we can't understand the thought or the why behind, like why it's there, there's almost a part of us that's like, oh, well, that's who I am. And this feels really uncomfortable.
Yes.
So I can't be this.
Yes.
And that's when and I think the transference thing as well, I think, it can be, it can feel really like hard because you feel like, oh, there's just another thing. But actually, like, if it's a form of harm reduction, then it's okay to, as long as you know that you're doing this thing, this transference, whether it's, you're shopping or sex or, there's so many behavioral things that we can effectively move our addiction into. And if it's working as a harm reduction tool for you, then give yourself some compassion and some grace with it, and be like, as long as I know that this is what I'm doing, and when I'm ready, when I start, when I've built up these tools and this resilience, then that's when I can maybe look at this a bit further and try and unlink and that's fine. But if it's harm reduction, then let it be harm reduction for a moment. Don't beat yourself up over it, because I think that's the thing. There's so much shame already when you are trying to change something that feels like an addictive thing. There's so much shame in being that. And that coupled with that identification of, I am this feeling and I cannot be this feeling, it feels like you're just white knuckling through it, doesn't it? And actually,
yes,
we don't need to.
You're so right in what you're saying about the thought or the belief of I am this feeling. It's taken me up until actually quite recently to be able to allow myself to have a bad day without it meaning I am depressed, I have depression, I am broken, I am doomed, this is dangerous, this is just who I am. I have somehow managed to get to, I say somehow, I know how I've got here, but it does sometimes feel like magic when I'm having a bad day and I can almost step outside of myself and look at it and say, oh, she's having a bad day, she'll be fine tomorrow. Or maybe it'll be a couple of days, but it's not going to be months. I know that this does not mean months of mental distress or meltdown or just being in bed under the covers not doing anything. I know that I am now like any other human being. I think that's the other thing, is we think when we are in it and when it's really bad, we think that no one else experiences it. This is the worst any human being could possibly feel. I am so broken, I'm the most broken person that there is. And actually stepping outside of that and allowing yourself to just have a bad day and realize that all human beings have a bad day, all human beings feel sadness and distress and all of those things in a variety of colors and extremities and degrees. And that's just part of the human experience. And it's okay to feel like that one day and feel good the next. That also doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. I think that for me, for a while, I sometimes couldn't understand that it was possible to feel bad one day and good the next. Again, I sort of thought, well, that must mean there's something wrong with me. No, it just means yesterday wasn't great, today's wonderful. That's okay. And I'm still probably learning that a little bit, that it is okay to have that variety of feelings. But also I would say that now those feelings are not anywhere near as extreme. So if I feel low, I don't go to the depths of lowness that I used to. And the same with the high, I think. And actually, with alcohol, you are trying to chemically generate that high, and it works sometimes, and you go soaring up there and you come crashing down. And you are, if you were to look at it on a piece of paper, you are zigzagging up and down the page like that. Whereas now I could probably draw my emotional scale in a much smoother, less extreme line. It looks much more fluid and much more human than this kind of monstrous thing that I used to identify with, like the extreme lows and extreme highs. And actually, when you take that thing out, that chemical thing that is making you go up there, you are also when you take that away, you're also removing the thing that made you go so low. And I think that's why life does just feel a bit more fluid and more manageable. Emotions feel more manageable. Equally, I think when you are so focused on your mental wellness, and it becomes, I would say, like, preserving or taking care of my mental health is my full-time job. Everything else is kind of extra. And so when there is a moment where you don't feel great, or where you feel a bit low, I think you can feel it almost even stronger, because it is almost a fear of it going lower. So it's kind of like quick, get better. And so I'm still actually learning to just relax into a variety of emotions and allowing all of them to exist, because there is merit in all of them. We are supposed to feel all of them. It just doesn't have to be so extreme.
Do you feel like part of you attached yourself to, like, in terms of like that I am, there's that part of you that's like, the emotions that I'm feeling, they are me, like that's my worth.
Yes.
That's like, if I am having a bad day, it means I'm a bad person living a broken life. That kind of, was that the
yes, because I think that was my identity. I would have probably at one point identified as an angry, sad person. I can't even the thought of me even thinking that about myself now is, I'm glad to say I feel so far beyond that being the way that I would identify myself as. But I did for a really long time, probably throughout the whole of my 20s, late teens and my 20s. I would have identified myself probably as an extreme person who was often, I am angry, I am sad, I am crazy. That would have been my belief. I am crazy. Now at 33, and having gone through doing the work, going through sobriety, completely reintroducing myself to myself and getting to know who I am, I can look at myself with total compassion and see how that happened. I get it. Whereas when I was in it, I just thought, I don't understand why I'm like this. I'm just broken. I'm just crazy. That's just who I am. And when I was 29 or 28, I met somebody who is now one of my, I love her to pieces, and she is one of my closest friends. And I met her, she's called Sam. She'd messaged me on Instagram. She's an actress, and I'd just done a film that she'd seen, or she'd I think we had some mutual work contacts, and she'd messaged and said, "Oh, do you fancy meeting up for a coffee?" And from her messages, I could tell that she thought quite positively of me. And so I felt really uncomfortable at the idea of meeting her, because I was convinced that she'd meet me and be so disappointed. So I didn't feel comfortable with letting this person down. But she, thank God, was really persistent, and she was like, "I think we should meet for a coffee. It would be great to chat." And so I was really nervous. And as soon as I met her, she walked into the coffee shop, and she was just this sort of I can only describe her as this glowing angel. Actually, she'd just been to the gym and she was in her gym kit and she was like, sorry, I'm sweating, I've just got off the gym. And but to me, she was just she was glowing from the inside out. And I just thought, who is this girl? Who is she? She just looks like joy. And actually, the film Inside Out, she was joy and I was sadness. That was how I saw us. And we'd been chatting for a bit and she told me that she'd never drank alcohol. And I was like, what? You've never drank, you don't drink? And I had never met anybody. I'd never, ever met anybody that didn't drink. And I couldn't believe it. And there was something in that meeting that set this kind of thought in motion for me, that maybe I could be happy like her, or I could feel or come across like her even. And I think that I always say she was a bit like this kind of guardian angel that just sort of appeared out of nowhere. And then we got talking a lot about spirituality and meditation and all these things that were so alien to me, but it seemed to be working for her. And I was like, it wasn't long after that I gave up drinking. I'm very, very grateful to her for that.
Yeah, it's amazing the people that you meet in life, and the people that kind of come and go, and people that stay. And yeah, I think it sounds like just fate. One of the things and we talked a lot about the beliefs of like, I am sad, I am crazy is a big one in terms of like beliefs. And if you have that running, this belief, like, I am crazy, I can't really imagine what your self-worth must have been like.
Well, I really think at one point I just had none. That belief of I am crazy and I am, all those sort of negative belief patterns really started for me in my teenage years. And they just sort of got worse and worse and worse. And I don't know, sometimes I was confident, sometimes I was happy, sometimes it's easy for me to sort of paint that whole part of my life as just negative, and it's not. I've had times of joy and times of ease and times of happiness, but in general, the default that I would go back to is I am crazy. And then you start to behave that way as well, I think. But this isn't necessarily a topic that I'm in any way qualified to talk about, but something that I find really interesting that I'm looking at the moment is birth control, hormonal, all these sort of hormones that we're put on from a very young age. Girls are put on those quite often at a very young age to control periods, period pains, whatever it is. It seemed to be this sort of blanket solution to anything period related. And we're all just put on them. And I'm pretty sure that is when I started to feel a bit crazy. And then the other thing that's very interesting is, again, I don't know much more than this other than what I'm going to say, but there is research being done at the moment about the link between hormonal birth control and antidepressants, and if they're taken at the same time. I know nothing more about it, and I obviously don't want to share any sort of misinformation, but the fact that is being researched and that there may be some kind of link between those two and mental health issues, to me is massive, because I was put on medication during a period of grief. My grandmother passed away. I was 19 and I was put on antidepressants, and I don't think I should have been. I was in a really destructive relationship. I was going through grief, and I was just put on antidepressants rather than having someone say to me, why don't you speak to a mental health professional? Let's see if we can kind of get to the bottom of this. Why are you feeling this way? And then from then on, for the next 10 or so years, I was just on both of those things that can create havoc within your mind and your body. And I was just taking them. And I do think that it made my brain a different version of what it naturally is. It's just something that I find very, very interesting, because you hear so many women say, I feel crazy. Women who are going through the menopause say it. They feel crazy. When we're premenstrual, women say, I feel crazy. And those, when it is sort of just naturally part of your cycle, that's one thing. But when you feel like that all the time, because you're not able to identify any sort of cycle, any kind of patterns, because things are just sort of like constantly being pumped through you, it's so difficult to identify reasons for things or why you might feel a certain way. And I think in the same way that I attribute my current sort of mental wellness to a huge combination of things, I feel the same about my previous mental distress or mental health difficulties. I attribute that to just a huge variety, a combination of so many things. One probably being put on birth control at so young, and medication that I maybe shouldn't have been put on. Mixing that as well with alcohol is like, that's why I sort of said earlier, I can understand now in hindsight and with compassion why I felt crazy for so long, because that's what I was doing. In my brain was a combination of chemicals that shouldn't have been in there. And I still have a lot of research to do on that, whether I want to sort of research that or whether I do just kind of let it be, because I'm now not on any of those things, and there's nothing wrong with having those things if they're working for you. But if they're not and you're still on them, I don't know. I just have a lot of feelings about that. And I do sometimes just think, no wonder I felt crazy. No wonder at the best of times, no wonder my brain didn't feel like mine for a really long time.
I think it looks at controlling the symptoms rather than the
cause,
the issue. It like the main thing is that, grief is a really difficult one, because grief is a part of life. If you love, you grieve.
Yeah.
Like,
we are supposed to, yeah.
But for some people, I can remember when my nan died, I thought I was physically dying.
I could be wrong here, but I'm sure I can remember you. Was this around 2007, 2008?
I was at uni.
Yeah, I can remember. Yeah, I can remember seeing you curled up on a sofa in the refectory under your scarf. And I remember saying, is she okay? And someone said that your nan had just passed away. And I remember it because I was going through the same thing, and I really felt for you because you were just curled up on the sofa, and it was really painful to see, actually.
It's really odd, isn't it? Because back then at uni, we didn't really speak. Like, we didn't really know each other that well. And
we didn't.
But we were both going through very similar experiences at the same time.
Yeah. I wish we had spoken, really. And I think it was that sort of like the year groups never mixed, did they? There was sort of this thing of you just don't talk to each other, you don't mix. And that was actually the period of time for me where I feel like a lot of things started for me, and I imagine possibly the same for you. It sounds like that it was a sort of a very difficult time.
Yeah, I think my issues had started before that, like in terms of like my eating stuff, but that was when I just sank into like depression and like all of that. But I think it's interesting as well, because obviously we both did performing arts, and I think that there is a part that was in both of us of just keep going, like, you know, show up, act your socks off, sing, dance, do all the things. Like, although there was part of us that is crumbling and couldn't cope, this other part comes in to just snowplow.
Well, it's quite handy when you have to just be someone else, I guess, for the day. Like, turn up today and I have to play a part and be somebody else. I think, as difficult as that time was, it was probably extremely helpful to be able to channel, or I don't know whether it's channeling it or actually compartmentalizing it, perhaps a bit of both.
Yeah. Well, I have no recollection of memories around that time, so you've given me a little nugget of my life back.
Sorry, I don't even know. I don't know if that was the best thing to have given you, but it was.
No,
I do very
I
much
find
remember
it fascinating.
Yeah, but with grief, I don't know how you feel about this. I think when it comes to grief, if it is so unmanageable that you can't get out of bed, and taking medication is going to at least get you out of bed to be able to walk around and live, then I get it. But if it is to cover over the natural process of grief and not allow you to actually experience it, I just think it's delaying things. I am almost certain that's what happened for me, that it just covered over a load of things and then it all comes out later. I think that's my experience anyway. I think,
because I know self-worth is something that you wanted to talk about. Like we were saying right at the start, it's always a process of who am I discovering and all of that. But I think that when you get to a point where things have come to a head, and you know you're in that place of realization and perhaps moving away from things that feel more damaging, there is a process of trying to build ourselves back up again. And I'm just interested how that's looked for you and how that process has been.
so again, I would say it's definitely a combination of things. The main thing I think that has really helped is verbal affirmations, positive self-talk, saying things out loud, even at the beginning when it can almost even feel like a lie. But if you start really small with things like, okay, this sounds really basic, but things like, I am alive. I am dedicated to being alive. I'm glad I'm alive. I'm glad I'm here. Starting small with just sort of saying those things out loud, because when you're just getting into it, saying things like, I am worthy, I am amazing, I am, those don't feel in line with how you actually are feeling, and it can feel like a lie, and I think it can have maybe actually the opposite effect. So if you start small with things that are positive and true, like I am alive, then you have something to go from. And then that starts to feel good. And then that starts to be the truth. I'm glad I'm alive. That's the truth. Okay, today that is absolutely the truth. And that continues to be the truth. Then you can start introducing things like, I am better than I was yesterday. I am improving. I am dedicated to being well. I'm happy that I'm feeling better. Just things that are true, things that are positive and true. And then you can start amping it up a bit. And then then you can kind of, then those start to be your truth. Then you start living by those things and you start living that way. And I did go through a phase. I've sort of calmed down a little bit now, but I went through a phase of from literally like jumping out of bed. And I was like, I'm alive and it's great and I love to be here. Possibly like a little bit on the higher level of kind of, slightly extreme, but at least it was positive and I wasn't really going back down again. I just kind of I found myself in this unknown phase of total serenity that I had never experienced before. And it was from saying things out loud and starting to believe them. And I just think there's so much merit in the things that we say have so much power over our belief system. Writing them down as well, seeing them written out on the page, getting things out of your head and writing them down on the page. Journaling is a huge one for me. And I've always journaled. I've always kept a diary. I've always written things down. I have done that since I was a kid. I've got stacks and stacks and stacks of diaries and journals. And when I was a kid, it would be like, this is what I did today. This is quite basic stuff. As a teenager, it became, my journal was all about the negative. It was just basically reaffirming every single negative thing. I'm this, I'm that, this person's this, reaffirming all the negatives. And in one way, it was really helpful to be able to at least get things out of my head and put them on the page, but it was still negative reaffirming. So now I am quite deliberate as well with what I journal. So if I'm having a bad day or I'm feeling some uncomfortable things, I will address them, but I will still write them down with a positive spin as much as feels possible on that day. So that I'm just constantly just reaffirming, like it's like exercising a muscle, the muscle of positivity and positive self-talk, to the point where now I can walk into a room full of people who at one point I would have put way above me and genuinely believe that I'm walking into the room as an equal. And that's huge for me. And that is from doing that work and that process so religiously and so much that I now fully believe, not even just believe, I know I'm an equal. I know I'm allowed to be there. I know I'm worthy of a position at that table. If I'm talking about sort of work, for example, that's now my knowledge rather than even a belief. I think it can go from belief then into knowledge. That's solid. That's who I am. And I do think it comes from what we literally tell ourselves and tell other people. So I'm careful now about if I'm feeling self-doubt or if I'm feeling anything negative about myself, which again, as a human being, that does come up. But I'm very careful about how I say that out loud. So for example, if I'm talking to a friend and I want to, communicate something to help me feel better about it, I will, at my very best, at least communicate it in a way that still allows me to feel positive about myself in some way. Even the act of saying, I'm feeling this thing about myself and I don't want to feel that. That's positive. It's still a positive act to, actively try and change your mindset on something. So at least even starting conversations with that sort of positive objective really helps. And it is just, I think it's such a process. There is another thing that kind of it links to this, but there is something for me about, so the word faith, for example, and I don't mean this in the religious sense. I guess it could be seen as a form of religion in a way, a faith in something bigger, and also a faith in myself and a faith in the link between the two. So that kind of, I guess, the faith in knowing that I'm the creator of my own reality. I'm the creator of my thoughts. I can choose what I think. And if I am telling the world that I am feeling positive things about myself, I'm getting positive things back. I have put that into practice now for a number of years, and to me it works. And I know for so many people that does work. If you put yourself forward and you give off a vibration, a positive vibration about yourself, you do get it back. You always, I do genuinely believe that life and your experiences is very much a mirror of what's going on inside. That can feel really uncomfortable at times because it's sort of puts it all on you. Okay, what am I doing to create this terrible experience that's happening? But I do fully believe that. I do fully believe in the power of positive affirmation. And regarding faith and that kind of, I suppose it's sort of spiritual in a sense, that belief in there's something bigger. There is an app that I use, which just tells you to list positive aspects. It's Abraham Hicks and all the kind of teachings of Abraham Hicks. It's about law of attraction and all of that stuff, that whole world, which is a whole separate conversation. But there's an app on my phone, and one of the games, they call them games, which I love because it's playful, is just list positive aspects, and it'll give you a prompt. Positive aspects about your home. Okay, I've got houseplants. I love my houseplants. I have a heater. I'm comfortable. I'm safe. You know, just those things. List of positive aspects about your family. List of positive. And it just, if you're starting to feel a negative wobble, just getting yourself into a positive mind frame, at least about something, is so powerful. And that's been absolutely key for me. And that's something I absolutely didn't have at all at one point. So that's new, and it is now part of me, I think. Belief, faith in something, for sure.
No, I love that. And you can tell that you're so passionate about it because you just light up when you start talking about it as well. Like there's so much confidence, and you can see anyone watching it on YouTube will be like, yeah, like you can just get it. And I think that's the thing. It's about being able to find the things that do build you up, because it is so like we are so used. Dexter's just walked in.
I was going to say, is that a dog or a baby?
Could be either.
Could be either. Oh, hello. I just remembered when he did that massive leap over the... Do you remember? I came to your house and he leapt over the you had like a stairgate thing.
Oh, stairgate.
I've never seen a dog jump that high. It's just...
He can jump higher than I stand. I don't know what he is. They say he's an Irish doodle, but I'm not sure.
Also, his tail propelled him over it. It's like both feet, all 4 feet off the ground, and his tail propelled him forward over that stairgate. And he was in the kitchen where he was not supposed to be.
Yeah. He's continued his sass the older he's got. How old was he when you saw him then? He must have been
would have been
young.
Probably about 3 years ago.
Yeah. He's 4 now. I mean, it sounds like as well that I'm one of the questions when you first started talking about it was that I thought about was like, how is the world? How have you found your outer world has responded to you? But it sounds like, being able to walk into a room and be like, no, I'm meant to be here, and having that like self-assuredness.
Yeah.
It sounds like it. I mean, I don't think I even need to ask the question, but tell us.
It's massive, because actually, one of the things I realized recently was, and this was massive for me, I was asked to go to London for a meeting, and it was the first meeting for this job that I'm currently on. And it was I think actually it was probably the first in-person meeting that I've had since lockdown, because everything I do is on Zoom. And I didn't realize, because you sort of feel like you are in a room with people, I just didn't realize that I hadn't been to something like that in so long. And I arrived in London. I was on my way to the meeting, and I thought this would be a time when I would probably have had a glass of wine because I was nervous. And I started to feel this, I did actually start to feel this anxiety about being in London and going to a meeting, because that for me as an environment is very much where I was in the lead up to stopping drinking. And we all know the lead up is when it gets bad. And so for me, I was in London on my way to a meeting, and I was like, oh, well, I'm not going into a pub. I'm not going to have a glass of wine. What do I have? So I went into Starbucks and I did a meditation. And I was like, I put my headphones in and I put it on, and I realized, and that, I think that was a really, really key moment for me where I realized, wow, I'm different. This is very different. And lo and behold, the meeting went great, and I came out and I felt great and I felt fine. I just felt good. I didn't feel, oh God, I didn't come out of there thinking, what have I said? Did I, like, just, I was like, I'm good. I'm all right. And it's so opposite to how that used to be for me. And I treat myself with total compassion over that. And I know there could very easily be judgment on something like, oh, what, you used to have a glass of wine before a meeting? Absolutely, because I was terrified and I had no idea how to deal with those feelings that is my story. And I stand by it with pride, in the sense that I have overcome that and I am able to now do a little meditation before a meeting and go in and be fine. I'm really proud of that. And it actually overshadowed what the meeting was great, but for me it wasn't even about that. It was about how I had managed some feelings of anxiety, and I just thought, this is the growth. This is measurable growth for me, because I think especially being in an environment that I absolutely associate with probably my absolute rock bottom, to be able to really see, like, it's like tangible evidence of growth. And I love those moments. Just, I get so excited about those moments. And actually on that, just sort of going back to alcohol, I guess something that I really realized recently in the last couple of months, was the workload, or the kind of work that I've been doing has been really, really intense, amazing, but intense writing and rewrites, and just sort of, I guess, just a very intense environment, wonderful and creative and exactly what I want to be doing, but intense. And I realized the fact that I don't even allow myself that this is the time where not allowing myself even one glass of wine comes into play, because I know that with levels of stress, or when things are getting when I'm tired, I know that those would be the times that the one would turn into countless. So again, it's been so nice to kind of go back into a work environment and just be able to manage all the naturally occurring feelings that go with a stressful work environment, and just know that I am absolutely in the driving seat when it comes to how I respond and react and manage myself in those rooms and in that kind of place. And that, yeah, I think that's just again another thing for me where it's like, oh, this is tangible growth again. I love that. I love those moments where I can see the work that I've done. That's kind of like that feels like a product that I can actually see and appreciate and get really excited over. So I'm very grateful for that. And actually, on the word gratitude, being able to be grateful for me, that I can thank myself and go, thank you for the decisions you've made. I'm grateful to myself. And that's massive, because again, like that would have been an alien thought at some point. Be grateful to myself? No, absolutely not. But to be able to actually go, well done and thank you and you're doing good, it's never lost on me. That kind of, those moments are never lost on me. I don't think they ever will be.
I'm I've got no business to be, I guess, but I am immensely proud of you. And
Oh, thank you.
it's just been really great because, I think there's about six months between our sober dates, and it's just been wonderful
Yeah.
because, there have been times in those 4 years where we've been like really in touch and where we haven't, but it's really nice because, and I think this is the whole thing about you, when you find your community, when you stop drinking, you kind of find like-minded people, you cheer each other on, and you don't have to actively
Yes.
do that, but it's
But
just
yeah,
that
yes,
kind
no, you're
of
so
like,
right. Like, yeah, go on, get it. Yes.
yeah.
I remember actually that I think the very first podcast we did, you might have been about 6 months. You might have been maybe about 6 months sober at that point, because it was really, really soon after that first episode that I quit. And I remember you telling me about it. And again, this was probably around the same time that I met Sam, and she told me that she didn't drink. Then I did the podcast with you, and you're like, I've quit drinking. And it was kind of like, is the
People
universe
do
telling
this.
me something? Yeah. It was kind of, yeah. And I remember you saying it, and I remember thinking, if only I could do that. And I don't, at that point, don't know that I believed I could, but I think it certainly, again, it planted another seed where it was like, well, hang on, if she can, maybe I can as well. And then sort of seeing your progression with it, and also just having someone who, it's almost like you're kind of in the year above me, like,
We swapped.
yeah, you're in the year above me at sobriety school, and I'm kind of like, it's just nice to see people's lives really change. I mean, look what you're doing and where you're at, and where you are now compared to then, not just sort of circumstantially, but internally. It's incredible. It's incredible. That light that's within is like, it's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's just, there's something to be said for the people that are like, from that are there, like in all these moments, and I think it's just wonderful, and I'm so grateful that you came on and we had a
Thank
catch
you.
up. And I think that the stuff that you've shared as well is so relatable, and I think so many people can benefit from even just being like a little bit more positive about themselves and talking to themselves in
Yeah,
a nicer way. And
I
like,
hope so. Yeah.
I think it's amazing. So I always say, um at the end, the podcast is called The Echoes. If you could leave a message in the echoes of this podcast for people to hear, what would it be?
It's probably going to be actually something drinking related, alcohol related. In If you feel like alcohol is a problem in your life, you owe it to yourself to remove it, is probably what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will, as always, pop all of the links and how people can find you. You've got some really incredibly exciting things coming up, which I'm sure you'll be shouting about when you can on Instagram and things.
I will be yelling from the rooftops. There's a couple of things that like I said to you, yeah, I'll keep quiet for now, but yeah, I'm really excited, and then I will be shouting, absolutely, in a really positive way.
Yeah, I'll be shouting too. Like I'm almost lost it when you worked on a film with Jessica Alba. I was like, oh my God. So can you imagine?
Amazing.
But yeah, so thank you so much, and
Thank you.
I'm just really grateful for you.
I'm very, very grateful for you too. Thank you so much.